All right, welcome back to another week of the Enrooted podcast. And this week, I have a very special guest, Mr. Dave, who I met at the blocks, which I've teased to y'all a little bit. And I'm going to not share everything about that experience quite yet because I'm not ready to share all that with you. But I want Dave Westcott to share everything about himself, introduce himself, and we're going to be talking all things honey and honeybees. So, Dave, give a little intro and, how did you get into honeybees?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for having me on the show. I'm super excited to be here today. Um, Bees, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you with the bees. So, um, I I'm a serial entrepreneur, and we bought a piece of property. And with that piece of property, well, let me back up a little bit because the bees is really important. But we had an office space in a little town that we live in called Linwood, and it was perfect, right? It was 5,200 square feet. It was $1,500 a month. It was a 20-year lease. Like, it was as good as it could be. And we had a house that was 5 minutes away. It was totally paid for. It had a pool in the backyard. It was awesome. But we're believers. And so we kind of live by this Joshua 1 kind of philosophy: build, be bold and very courageous. And so we're going to expand our business and we're going to grow our business. And so we start looking for commercial property. We can't find anything. And so in that, we're looking, my wife's been on my case about moving. We got kids, get a bigger house, whatever. And so we get into this place where we find this piece of property out in the country, and it can serve both our business need and it can serve our personal need, but we've got to combine the two. And so we move into this farm that's 6.5 acres, and just trying to be bold and very courageous. And we undertake this big payment and this big stress when everything was paid off. We're trying to live that be bold and courageous. And so I'm sitting and I'm really praying and I'm thinking, God, what am I going to do with this property? What am I going to do with this property? I don't want to have cows. I don't want to have horses. I don't want to do any of that. And I'm just praying about it and praying about it. I don't know. I prayed about it for a while. And the guy who runs Enbridge, his name is David Lundquist. He works for me, and that's my nonprofit, which gives back to charity. So from all the businesses that we own, money goes into that nonprofit, and we give them a charity. Well, he says, he starts telling this story about being a beekeeper. And I start listening to the story about bees. And I'm like, I love bees. I love bees because they pollinate. I love bees because save the bees. I love bees because it could be a cool business. I love bees because I have this farm. And so we start doing the math. We start putting together. We start thinking about the investment. And it feels like God brought me bees. Okay. And at the end of the day, I'm like, listen, we're going to do a bee business. And he's like, well, how many hives do you want to start with? I said 1,000.
Why not, right?
Yeah, right not, right? And he goes, well, Dave, that's a little too many. And we ended up starting with 3.
It seems more reasonable.
And that's a little bit more reasonable. So we do 3 hives, and then we expand to 100 hives, and then we keep growing, right? So the moral of the story is, though, that we really got into the bee business because I wanted to be a good steward of the land. Like, I felt like God had given me land. And I felt like, in prayer and in just relationship, like God gave me this piece of property. And so I really come back to the story of the man with the talents. Like, God gives one 10, he gives one 5, he gives one 1, one buries it. He buries it, God takes it away. I feel like this land, this property is a talent, and it's a big property. So maybe it's of the value of 10. So what am I going to do with this land? And so, okay, well, if we pollinate, we make the world better. And if we sell honey, we make a profit. And if we pollinate almond fields and blueberry fields and raspberry fields, we make the world a better place. Well, we also get paid for that. Well, what if we take that profit and we give it to charitable causes? 90% of them are Christian, to help change the world. Now, what are we doing with our talents? And so that's really the whole story. I don't know if you wanted to go all like that, but that's the real story of how Honey for Hope actually started. To be perfectly honest, was just trying to be a good steward and honor God. And that's really where the whole thing started.
I love that you brought up the parable of the talents. One, because that is one of my go-to verses for financial sustainability on the land. And I'm going to be preaching it in my landowner to steward program coming up. And I share it in a lot of my different videos of like, how do you know we were meant to be good stewards and utilize and make a profit? Parable of the talents, the two that made profit, no matter how big or small, they had different, sizes based on their ability, which I also love, that God gives us based on what our ability is to handle. And the one that just kind of kept the status quo, that kept it exactly the same, is considered the wicked servant, the lazy servant. And so
Yeah.
I use that scripture all the time. So I'm really glad you brought it up. I love how you're connecting. You had the 6 acres and you wanted to really utilize it, because I have women that have all sizes of acres, from less than 10 acres of acres to 10,000 acres.
Right.
And we all have that same drive of making sure we're being good stewards. And I always come it back to Genesis 2:15, that we were meant to work the land. Adam was meant to work the Garden of Eden. And I look at you kind of looking at like, how am I going to be a good steward? I can utilize bees, and bees is helping us work the land in so many different aspects of it. So
Yeah.
I love that you are connecting all of those dots for me here.
You know what? The Lord works in mysterious ways. I mean, it's everything. Nothing happens by accident. Having Dave, connecting with him, his many years of beekeeping, him kind of being a bee mentor, helping me along the way, figuring it out. His son-in-law is my head beekeeper who runs the entire program. So just all of those things that happen, right? They happen by us taking the first step. And sometimes we just have to be bold and courageous, just like, the folks who had the 5 talents and the 10 talents. Like, they knew the master was hard, they knew the master was tough, but they still had to step out and earn. They still had to step out and double what they had. And the one who was lazy and scared, like, he was scared because the master was tough, and so he buried it in the ground. And so we have to be willing to take the step, try to open the door. God's going to close or open the door. If we're following him, all things work together for those who are called according to his purposes. And so, that's the methodology that I'm trying to follow in business.
I love that. I love how you're using Joshua, very similar to how I use Esther 4:14, that sometimes we're thrusted into roles that we would have never expected, never asked for. And we're at a crossroads of deciding what are we going to do. And I usually encourage, like Esther, pray for 3 days, call into your resources, and step out into it, even if you're unsure of those next steps. You got to be bold and step into that role that perhaps God has placed you into for a very particular reason. Like you said, nothing happens for a reason. Jeremiah 29:11, even if we don't fully understand it all.
That's right. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Like, we could walk through something and think, this is the best thing ever. But, I could get into this honeybee thing and I could be rolling and all my bees could die. Right.
Yeah.
Like, there's a potential that happens, even with experience in beekeeping, even with experienced beekeepers on the team. Like, we could still have that happen. And then we might say, God, why did you let this happen to me? Oh my God. We could start to go down that path, but that's not true. Right. Everything does happen for a reason. And even bad is worked out for good for those who are called according to his purposes, and give thanks in all circumstances. That's another huge piece. Like, even if it doesn't work out, even if it doesn't go the right way, thank you, God, for the experience. Thank you for what I learned. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the failure.
And I think that's probably one of the harder parts, at least for me, is like, and I'm reading in Exodus right now, and I'm at the point in Exodus 5 at the very end where Moses just like, why? Why did you call me here just to make things worse? And that's where I read 6 tomorrow. So that's all I got for you. But it very much reminds me of that, like, how to be thankful in the hard times. And I was telling them this morning, trying to reflect back like on Joseph, on how he was so faithful in the pit and, the prisons, when he was a slave, and like, he didn't know where he was going to end up. He just stayed faithful for the next day. Like, he didn't dwell on the past.
Yeah.
He just looked at, okay, what did I learn? And let's move forward, essentially.
Yeah, it's so true.
Well, I want to know from your experience, and there's going to be two main things I want everybody to hear from
Yep.
today. How to maximize profit, which I want you to talk about in a minute. But if someone is interested in exploring honeybees, because as you and I have talked off screen, a lot of the landowners and the women that I've seen that have dealt with honeybees or have bees on the property is usually a tit for tat trade. Yes, you could put your boxes here. I get a few jars of honey, which I'm not knocking just getting a few jars of honey. I love me some honey. But if they wanted to look into this as an alternative revenue source, what are the things they should know before they embrace trying to go into honeybees? What is the time commitment? Are there any nuances that they need to be aware of? And what's kind of like an ROI, I guess, very, very roughly of if they put this much time in, like what can they expect to be able to get out of it in the end?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one, I think kind of it depends on how big you do it and what you kind of think of there, but how big you want to grow. But I think one is have a love for bees first. Like make sure that you love bees because bees are a creature. Bees are like a pet. So, if you're great with cats, if you're great with dogs, if you're great with turtles and fish, like, then probably bees are in your alley, right? But if you don't like taking care of those things, then bees is definitely not for you. So you got to love bees because bees need love and bees need care. And bees make honey, but the reason that bees make honey is so that they can feed themselves. They don't make that honey necessarily so that you can come and take it and sell it and make a profit. What they're trying to do is store up enough honey so that they can eat it and they can sustain themselves during the winter months when it's cold and they can't go fly and get nectar and pollen and all of those things. So you have to understand that going into it, that as you take their honey, you are taking their food. And so you have to replace that. You have to love your bees. You have to take care of your bees. You want to be in your hives. You want to be watching out for your hives, protecting your hives, praying for your hives, whatever you got to do. Like this is an important thing. But if you decide I love bees, then that's the next step. If your mission is I want to save the bees, then just plant flowers because the number one things that bees need is they need flowers to pollinate. But if you love bees and if you can see yourself taking care of bees, then what I would say is fire bullets, not cannonballs. If you have big pieces of property, start like I started with 3. Okay, that was a good place for me to start. It's a little nerve wracking getting in the hive the first time. It's a little bit nerve wracking, taking care of them. And there's things that you have to like worry about. And big thing you have to worry about is varroa mite, right? That's a pest. So understanding how you take care of it. There's varroa strips and there's little, acid formulas that you can put in there and clean them out. So, but understanding how to care for the bees. There's sugar water, which we mix sugar and water together. We put it in the hive. They can feed on it. There's things called pollen patties that we can drop into the hives and, help them feed and grow. And so once we know that we can take care of the bees and that the bees can be sustainable, now we can start to think about profit. And so there's a lot of different ways to make profit on bees. And so one of those things is honey. So a good healthy hive will produce, about 75 pounds of honey each year. Okay. And that's just kind of a mid average. Sometimes that's a little lower. If it's a really healthy hive, it can be double. But if you have that healthy hive and you can take 75 pounds of honey out, you can imagine that on the wholesale market, you can sell that for about $10 a pound. Okay. And so each hive can produce about $750 in income from my experience on honey sales. So if you have, 10 hives, that's $7,500. If you have 100 hives, that's $75,000. Now, that's something that you can probably do, right? You don't have to have a lot of help with that. You can do that yourself. You can market it. You can sell it at farmers markets. You can sell it online. So it's a relatively easy way to make cash. Okay. Then you've got wax sales. You'll see a lot of people with honeybee wax where you take the wax and you carve ice cream cone candles or body candles or, just decorative candles, whatever you want. There's a lot of different options there, and you can sell those for, 10, 15, $20 a piece, depending on your market and how decorative they are. So you've got the wax sales. And then you've got the honeycomb. You can sell the honeycomb. And so you can sell this for, I don't know, $7, $8 for a little bite-sized cube of it, and so that's a way to make money in resources. And then pollination contracts. So if you have any kind of raspberries or blueberries or oranges or apples or any kind of fruit, normally when you pollinate, that farmer can get 8 to 10 times the revenue crop, approximately, right? And so pollinating is really important. And so if you have 100 hives and you put those 100 hives into apple orchards, you might get $60 a month per hive, right? And so like you might want to do apples, and then you might want to do blueberries, and then you might want to do raspberries, and then you might want to do, wildflower or something, whatever it might be, clover. A lot of people do clover. There's many things that get pollinated. And so farmers really need bees to help them pollinate their crop. And so those are the ways that you can make money. And kind of what I figure is by the time you have 1,000 hives, if they're healthy, if they're going the right way, using those revenue streams, you can make about $2.5 million a year. This is just what I think. That don't quote me on this, and if it doesn't work out, I'm sorry, but
Disclaimer: everyone
that's right. That's
gets
right.
different
There's your disclaimer.
answers.
And I think you got like $1 million in profit. That's kind of what it looks like in my world. And then also, but included in that is what's called nuke cells. So every time, like let's say you have 100 hives, that 100 hives, if fed healthy and taken care of, will produce, it's called splitting of the hives, will produce another 3 to 5 hives per hive. So at minimum, your 100 hives should turn into 300. At maximum, your hives should turn into 500. And you can typically sell those nukes for around $250 a piece. So you also make money on the splitting of hives. And then there's things called queen rearing, where you can, rear queens, and you sell them for maybe $75. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of revenue streams. Those are the simplest to manage. Those are the simplest to take care of. I think the profit is really good if you have a good business plan, you've got it thought out well, and you love what you do. And I don't want to make it sound easy, because it's not. You're taking care of bees, they're living, there's pests that can get inside of them. All sorts of things can happen. I know that was a really long answer, and I hope that answered all of the questions
It
that
did,
you had.
with the exception of one. I didn't know there were so many options for diversifying. I was just thinking straight honey, and then you're throwing in wax sales and pollinator contracts and honeycomb. And that's really, really exciting to me, because one, it shows all the diversity that I would have never even thought about, which is fantastic, because I'm always teaching about that for the forest lands, but I don't even think about like going down the rabbit hole into these different niches. So it's a whole new world of opportunities that I wasn't even aware of. And I was sold more or less when you were just like, you can make $750 a year on one hive. I was like, great, taxes are paid. Like, I
There you
am
go.
good. That's how I look at it. And so seeing even more than that is just like, mind boggling. But I do want to know about like the time commitment. You're talking a lot about if you got to love the bees. And I love how you say, if you want to save the bees, plant the flowers. If you love bees, get hives. But I want to know, like, what is this time commitment? You compared it to loving cats and dogs. And I think in our head, we understand that daily commitment. We understand the daily commitment of getting, cattle and horses and sheep. But when it comes to bees, I feel like it's kind of abstract if you've never ventured into it. So what does that type of time commitment and quality of care look like that is necessary for a healthy hive?
Yeah, great question. I kind of think of it like an hour a week per hive.
Okay. So
That's
that's
kind of
not,
what
you
it
don't have to
takes.
go out there like every day and check on them or anything, but you do need to
No.
be close enough or have someone that is close enough to check on them every week.
Yeah, you want to be looking at them every week. And in the summertime, maybe, I mean, okay, let's be honest. Like if you're keeping them, down in your neck of the woods, you're not going to open up the hive in the winter, right? So
Mhm.
like from October to or maybe November to February or something, when it's cold, like we don't want to be opening up the hive. We want the hive to be fed, we want it to be healthy, but those bees are in there, they're basically in hibernation mode. So we want to protect them, we want to help them come out of hibernation, we want them to be living, even though they're moving around in the hive, they're just not flying. So if you're a bee expert, you're gonna be like, bees don't hibernate, and I'll be like, yes, I know, they're just not flying around, they're just hanging out in the hive.
I need the simple
So
version.
that's right. So in the summertime and in the spring is when you're checking on your hives, and you open up the hive box and you're pulling out the frames, and you're checking for varroa mite, and you're treating the hives. That's your biggest thing. Is you're just, typically in spring and fall you treat for varroa mite. It's going to be something that tries to wipe your hives out. But if you treat for it and you manage it, you're okay. And then you're just looking at their production, making sure they're doing okay, making sure that, maybe you feed them a pollen patty, or you give them some, honey water, sugar water, whatever. And so you're just making sure that they're fed and that they're doing good. And then as they grow, you're watching to make sure they don't swarm, because as they get bigger and bigger, they'll swarm out of the hive because they don't have room enough in the hive. And so maybe you add another box, or maybe you split the hive and create another hive, right? So that's where that really comes into play. But I think it's just caring for the hives. It's making sure that the pests aren't getting into the hives. And it's constantly learning. Like, I think the other piece to it is, where you're at, like, get a bee mentor, find the local bee association, find somebody in your area who's doing it, take beginning beekeeping classes. So maybe you've got an hour a week per hive just in the maintenance, but then maybe you've got an hour a week in continued education, where you're just continuing to learn and have a mentor. Because there's going to be little things that you run into where it's just like, oh, I need this question answered. How do I handle this? Because it's a little bit of fun, it's a little bit of biology, it's a little bit of science, and it's a lot of love. And I think if you combine those things, then I think you've got successful hives.
You answered my next question. I was going to ask about what resources do you recommend for someone that wanted to venture into and explore beekeeping as an option on their land. So local bee associations, do you have any online like go-to resources? You're like, hey, yes, go here. This will kind of really dive into the simple and then the rabbit hole questions.
I think every state has a local, like, bee chapter, right? I can't think of one that doesn't. So you want it, like, and a lot of counties do too. So, like, even county specific, there's a lot of people involved in bees. So what you want to do is you want to check with your local county and just see, hey, what's the, like, Snow King Beekeepers is up here, right? It's for Snohomish and King counties. So there's a lot of people that participate in there. And I think before you get into beekeeping, maybe take the beginner bee class, like, learn about it, visit the hive, see what it's all about, kind of get your feet wet there so that you have a good understanding. And then if you have a local fair, like a county fair or a state fair, a lot of times you'll see, a booth or two where there are beekeepers advocating for bees. And, they've got a lot of resources, and they can share, a lot of things too, that can help you. But really, it's good to be localized, because what works in Seattle, where I'm at, may not work, in the South, may not works different in Minnesota, works different in the Northeast, works different in Southern California. We have different things that we fight, different issues that we may have. And so it's really important to be tapped into a local support system. But the long and the short of it is that bees are amazing. 75% of our food comes from bees. And 90% of the bees kept in North America are from backyard or professional beekeepers.
That's fantastic. And I was going to ask too, you're just hitting all my questions before I even asked them about, like, if bees were different in different regions. So I talk about forestry and forest management is very different. Like where you're at in Seattle, Washington, it's a completely different forestry animal. Land ownership, kind of the same, but forestry, different animal. I can't teach you the forestry principles that I teach here because we have just completely different norms. Is there different norms for bees based on your regions or markets, or any nuances along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, bees that are in hotter climates where they can, work and grow honey all year long are like, that's ideal, right? But then you've also got farmers that are putting tons of pesticides on those plants, and those pesticides don't have water or rainfall to wash off the pesticides. So you can have, hive loss just from, over chemicalization of the plant material. So, like, you've got pros and cons there, right? So you got to be careful with your hives. You're going to lose more hives. And then up in Seattle, like where I'm at, the biggest threat is probably moisture. Like rain is the biggest killer, because if moisture gets into the hive is toast. And then in other areas, like maybe the Northeast or Minnesota or something like that, you've got the extreme cold to deal with. So making sure that the bees have enough honey, they have enough sugar water to last the year. And then maybe we get down into the South and you've got some kind of mixed climates, right? Like,
Yeah.
Florida's hot all the time, but Georgia's a little bit more like Seattle, and North Carolina can be hot. Like you can go see palm trees, but then it can get some cold snaps that kind of happen. So it's kind of more like that Seattle temperature, where you just got to make sure you don't get moisture into the hives. And then when you have those fluctuating temperatures, you just want to make sure that your bees don't think, okay, great, now it's the weather's warmed up, now it's time to go fly, but there's nothing to pollinate. They use up their energy, then they come back to their hive and there's nothing to eat. So geographically, it's really important. And I think that's why it's really important to get into your local beekeeper association, because they're going to help you with those local nuances and those local tips. But if you invest in bees, go all in, right? I think if there's one thing, it's like go all in, be committed, be educated, and do your best to take care of the hive. And I think if you love them and take care of them, it's something that you can be successful at.
And so I want to hear more for Honey for Hope in just a second. I just wanted to get your like 3-step opinion. If someone decides they want to go all in, they're investing into some of their education and tuning into their local markets. What 3 steps do you recommend to kind of maximize your opportunities with honeybees, whether it's profit, ecologically, just like maximizing this opportunity, especially, of course, especially for revenue as an alternative profit source for their forest lands?
Yeah, awesome. I think there's a couple of great opportunities. So if you're in a major metropolitan area, right, then I think, possibly renting hives to people who want to be backyard beekeepers, like here's 2 hives in the year, and I'm going to charge you $2,000. You get a pound of honey and I take the rest, right? Like that's really huge. But if you're in more rural areas, then you're going to have a great opportunity to grow larger amounts of hives, maybe into the thousands, even if you're that ambitious. And then that's a great opportunity to take advantage of pollination contracts. Like I know today there's people in Minnesota who take their bees down to Mississippi because there's a shortage of bees, right? And so they need to pollinate. So like people travel their bees. We travel our bees from Washington to California. So we cross multiple states with our bees. So traveling and moving your bees to pollinate is something that's widely accepted and widely normal. So you take care of your bees, and then you're going to drop those bees in a field and you're going to get paid. So that's a huge way to make money. And then, of course, focusing on the honey, extracting the honey, understanding how to pull it, having a honey extractor is what it's called. That's going to be your consistent revenue day after day, year after year. So if I was looking at like 3 main revenue streams, that's really how I would do it, whether I'm suburban or rural. And then, of course, focusing on honey and getting really good at pollination and honey, I think are the biggest takeaways that I would have from a profitability standpoint.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, with our last few minutes, I really want to hear more about Honey for Hope and share a little bit about the story. I know you teased it at the very beginning, but share more what Honey for Hope is, why you started Honey for Hope, and then what you kind of expect for it in the future.
Yeah, awesome. So Honey for Hope, I mean, the name Honey for Hope is one, like pollination helps to save the world, right? So if we're pollinating, then we're helping society, we're helping humanity. It's a good thing to do. 75% of the food that we eat comes from pollination. So that's really awesome. That gives hope for humanity. And then we take the profit and we actually donate the profit back to charitable causes. So amazing places like Dawson Place that help 1,125 sexually abused children a year. Next Step Pregnancy Clinic, which helps any gal who's going to have a baby with free medical services, free diaper, free formulas. New Heart Foundation, which helps men and women with life controlling substance abuse issues and Christ-centered recovery. Those kind of places, those kind of organizations are where the profit goes from Honey for Hope. So when you buy honey from us, or you buy bees from us, or we pollinate your fields, or whatever it might be, the profit is actually going to make the world a better place. And that's the purpose of Honey for Hope. Let's make the world a better place. Let's use our HPA, our highest payoff activity. Let's use what we're great at to help change the world. And that's our mission, change the world. And so everything we do with Honey for Hope is meant and geared to change the world and make the world a better place. Because at the end of the day, we've all had that tough moment in life where we didn't know how we were going to take a step forward. We didn't know if we could make it. Depressing, sad, the world's ending. That's how we felt in our personal life. And so we needed that helping hand. And so if we support incredible small organizations that make big impacts locally, nationally, and internationally, then we're doing our part to change the world. And so that's what Honey for Hope is all about today.
I love it. I love how you taken your Christian stewardship and blended it with your land stewardship and blended it with just how you create and continue to create this generational wealth and giving back, and your ability to look at growing profit and wealth, especially as a tool and means to continue our biblical duty, to help others, to love others. I just love everything about that. So I really appreciate what you're doing. I really appreciate your time. I could probably definitely go down some rabbit holes, but that is all we are going to do for today. Maybe we'll have a part 2 depending on the feedback I get from everybody. So
Totally.
if you want to go down some rabbit holes on some honeybees and marketing or strategy or beekeeping, let me know. Send me a message, send me an email, send me a comment, and we can definitely line something up. But any last words, Dave, you want to share with everybody here?
No, just thank you for having me on the show. I think what you're doing is awesome. I love that you lead with the godly principles. I think you've got an incredible organization, and I'm privileged and honored to be on the show.
Thank you so much. Until next time, y'all.